This one comes from Jake Watches. Someone secretly put a tracker on my car, and now I'm being followed. I've always considered myself a relatively cautious person, but this was something I never imagined could happen to me. It all started when I noticed something strange. As I was finishing filling up my tank, I saw a small, dark object tucked under the rear bumper of my car. At first, I thought it was just some litter, maybe a piece of trash someone had thrown out of their car. But when I got closer, my heart dropped. There it was, a small black box with a blinking red light. I had no idea what it was at first, but something about it didn't sit right with me. That's when the dread hit me. It was a GPS tracker. I've seen things like this in movies, but never in real life. It seemed surreal, almost as if I had stepped into one of those crime thrillers I like to watch. I instantly felt like I was being watched, that there was someone out there tracking my every move. I quickly looked around the gas station, hoping to see something or someone who could explain it, but there was no one in sight. The station was deserted, the clerk inside barely glancing up from his phone. I shoved the tracker into my glove compartment and got in my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea who could have put it there or why. All I knew was that I wasn't safe anymore. For the rest of the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see another car tailing me, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling of paranoia settled over me like a heavy cloud. It didn't help that my mind kept racing, wondering who would do something like this to me, and why. I decided not to report the tracker just yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or look like I was overreacting, but something didn't feel right. I started thinking about all the times I might have unknowingly crossed paths with someone, or pissed off someone without even realizing it. Could this be a result of some old feud, a stalker? I didn't know. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual. My mind kept playing out different scenarios, all of them worse than the last. What if they were still watching me? What if they were tracking my every move right now as I sat in my home? And what if they had already started making their move? The next day, I decided to try and go about my life as usual. I had work to do, errands to run, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling of dread. As soon as I stepped into my car to head out for the day, I noticed something strange again. It wasn't just the tracker. It was the same feeling from the night before. I looked up and down the street, expecting to see a car lingering too long or someone watching from a distance, but there was nothing. I tried to shake it off, but the unease stuck with me all day. Things only escalated the following night. I stopped at the same gas station, partly out of habit and partly to see if anything looked suspicious. When I pulled in, I noticed a car parked near the station, facing the back, where the alleyways were. It wasn't parked in a normal spot, and for some reason, it felt off. I didn't think much of it, but I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching me. As I walked inside to pay, I kept my head down, trying not to attract attention. That's when I heard the door open behind me. I didn't think anything of it until I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, startled, but no one was there. I turned again, and there, standing right behind me, was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with an unsettling calm. My stomach twisted into knots as I felt my skin prickle with fear. He finally spoke, but his voice was low and cold. "You know they're watching you, right?" His words sent a shock of ice through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Don't play dumb," he said with a grin, leaning in a little closer. "You've been tracked. They're watching your every move." My blood ran cold. The tracker. It wasn't a random thing, it was part of something bigger. I thought about the night before, the way the black SUV had followed me, how they'd been so persistent. They knew everything about me, the man continued. They know what you've been doing, where you've been going, who you've been talking to. It's only a matter of time before they make their move. I tried to stay calm, but panic was rising in my chest. Who's watching me?" He shrugged, the smirk never leaving his face. "Does it really matter? You're just a pawn in their game now." Then he stepped back, walked out the door, and disappeared into the night. I stood there frozen, trying to comprehend what had just happened. What game was he talking about? And who were they? I quickly left the gas station, heart pounding in my ears. I drove aimlessly for a while, just trying to get away from that place, trying to escape the overwhelming fear that had suddenly settled in my chest. I was too terrified to go back home, so I spent the night driving around, stopping in random parking lots, trying to make sure I wasn't being followed. But deep down, I knew I couldn't outrun this. It wasn't just about the tracker anymore. It was about something much bigger. The people who had put that tracker on my car, the people who had been following me, they weren't going to stop. I knew this was just the beginning. I felt like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. My thoughts were racing a mile a minute. What did they want from me? Why was I being targeted? And what was I supposed to do about it? As I drove, I tried to think of my next move. I thought about calling the police, but I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. They'd think I was just paranoid or imagining things. I couldn't even prove any of this. Who would believe me without any concrete evidence? Finally, I made a decision. I pulled into a secluded parking lot and got out of my car. The first thing I did was rip the tracker off the underside of my car. I held it in my hand, wondering if it was connected to something even bigger, something I wasn't seeing. As I stood there holding the device, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. There was a small engraving on the back of the tracker, almost like a serial number, but there was something strange about it. It wasn't a random code or anything, it was a name. And that name meant something to me. I recognized it. It was the name of someone I used to know. Someone who had been in my life years ago. Someone I thought was gone. Someone I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everything clicked. The fear, the stalking, the tracker, it was all connected. They weren't just tracking me, they were watching me because of my past. And I was going to have to confront it head on if I wanted to get out of this alive. Now, I'm not sure who I can trust. I feel like I'm in way over my head and there's nowhere to hide. But I have to do something before it's too late. Because I know one thing for sure, now this is far from over. I started going back through the years, trying to piece together what I might have missed. The name on the tracker? It triggered a memory I had buried deep. It was someone from a dark part of my past, someone I thought I had left behind. The idea that they could be involved made me sick to my stomach. I had no clue what their game was, but I was certain of one thing. Whoever they weren't just stalking me. They were preparing for something bigger, something I was yet to fully comprehend. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't just sit there waiting for them to make their move. I had to find out who was behind all of this and why. After checking my car, I realized something worse. The tracker was back. They had somehow replaced it overnight, and that thought made me realize that I was dealing with professionals, people who had the means and the time to keep me under constant surveillance. I still don't know how they're tracking me so closely, or who's behind all of it, but I've learned one thing. The moment you start questioning your safety, you're already in too deep. And now, I need to make a decision. Do I keep running from the shadows, or do I step into the light and face whatever they have planned for me?